Hi and welcome to the Geek Legion of Doom. This is a fantasy movie review and I'll be having a look at the movie Ironclad. So Ironclad is kind of a medieval action film, very loosely based on certain historical events, but to be honest with you, there's so many liberties taken here, you can't really call it a true historical film. So really this is why I kind of lump it under a fantasy film, to be fair. So it kind of focuses mainly on a character called Brother Thomas, who is played by James Purefoy. I'm not sure that's actually how you say his name. This guy's got one of those names who I simply don't know how to pronounce, but we'll just call him that. And he's a sort of central character, and he plays a Knights Templar, who, in case you don't know, are kind of almost like warrior monk types, mainly sort of in the Crusades and things like that. And it kind of revolves around his character, and his kind of gets dragged into this sort of situation involving King John. Now, we're told in a prologue that King John is the King of England at the time, and he's pretty much despised by the majority of England. He's pretty much almost a wild party boy without any really responsibility, and kind of neglecting his roles and really sort of running England into the ground. And he's pissing off the common man and the sort of the barons and the sort of more noble people alike. So he's kind of coerced really into sort of signing this document called the Magna Carta, essentially limiting his powers, but still being king. However, he takes exception to this, and kind of really, if he ever comes across anyone who is kind of was party to this, making him sign this document, he pretty much wants to dispatch them. And this is causing obviously civil unrest between obviously the kingdom, the church, and obviously sort of rebellion within that sort of system. So he comes across a castle, and we have actually the Knights Templar, Brother Thomas, as I say, played by James Purefoy, or whatever, along with him and a couple of his other cohorts. Now they're all murdered apart from Brother Thomas, who manages to escape and kind of, wants revenge ultimately for sort of, him sort of murdering his brothers in arms and priests and stuff like that. And he feels like King John has pretty much got to be stopped, and he kind of goes back to this church where he kind of meets this sort of the bishop played by Charles Dance, and he's getting pressure from the Vatican to sort of almost support King John. So they kind of almost sort of go and do their own thing, and what they want to do is ultimately try and bring a French making the lines of the French to sort of have a French prince go on the throne and kind of pretty much get rid of King John. At the same time, King John, there's a particular castle in Rochester, and they have to sort of there's of strategic importance basically, and it's a case of whoever controls that particular castle is controlling a strategic bit of land. So you have basically Brother Thomas and a sort of group of other sort of rebels, including a baron and some sort of mercenaries, end up sort of going to this this castle and then not exactly taking over it, but almost sort of claiming it as part of the rebellion, and then kind of like having to sort of get the people in the castle, including the Lord and his wife, along with about 11 I think other sort of like soldiers that just happen to be there. And then there's about 20 of them, and they have to defend this castle from all of these sort of Danish mercenaries that King John has kind of like sort of coerced into helping him to try and take back England. And then ultimately what you have is then it's a kind of the rest of the movie is pretty much a siege film ultimately with King John's massive army and these sort of 20 or so sort of soldiers really trying to defend the castle, and then obviously what happens. So that's pretty much the plot. So as I say, it isn't particularly historically accurate. There are some very sort of historical inaccuracies and things like that. So if you're a kind of historian type and you kind of want to have a good depiction of time, those times, this isn't going to be the film for you, unfortunately, because there are a few things that are going to be kind of maybe rubbed you up the wrong way. They sort of changed it just to sort of suit the narrative of this film. And things like the way the women act in this are obviously not. It's not what they were like back then, unfortunately. So but if you're looking at this for a sort of medieval action film, on the other hand, I think you can do certainly a lot worse with this film. I think James Purefoy's Brother Thomas is quite an interesting character. He's quite stoic. initially he doesn't really talk a hell of a lot, and he's pretty much doesn't talk a massive amount throughout the whole film. But you know, you get the impression he's a very strong character. He's kind of got this sort of roughish charm, but he's never sort of like a smarmy character. He's pretty much always very, very serious, and he kind of strikes a little bit of a romance with this sort of this lord's wife, and you know, that's obviously a little bit taboo. And you kind of get to know the sort of the characters of these sort of these people that are trying to defend this castle. There's kind of like a ragtag group of like mercenaries that the sort of Baron has got. Now I have to be honest with you, the characters do seem a little bit cliche. You've kind of got the kind of like the jolly thief, and that one you've got the kind of like the womanizer, blah blah blah. So they're all very much sort of character archetypes that you've maybe seen in other films. They're likeable enough, but they're pretty much you know, things you've seen before. You know, the kind of like naive but brave squire and things like that. Anyway, the battle scenes I think are pretty decent. I think maybe the Danish were a little bit underserved in this one. They kind of seem to be really sort of just faceless morons ultimately, and they have the kind of their own sort of, you know, commander as such, and we don't really sort of get to know much about them. But you know, maybe that's the point ultimately of this film. But the battle sequences are well shot. I do think Paul Giamatti playing King John is maybe a little bit too overblown here, I have to say. I think he's maybe a little bit too sort of like crazy almost. And you know, it's an interesting take on King John, but I wasn't a massive fan. He didn't even try for an English accent, but I just think he seemed a little bit too wild and crazy, I think, for what I would be thinking of King John. But you know, as an action film, I thought it was very good. It was, you know, it was some great action sequences, some great set pieces. It looked fantastic. I thought it was, you know, obviously very well shot, very well directed. You know, as I say, a few maybe sort of character sort of things where maybe the script could have been tightened up and things like that, maybe to give us a little bit more depth on certain characters and things like that. But you know, ultimately, I enjoyed this film. If you're an action fan of it, especially if you kind of like your kind of sword and sorcery, that sort of film, you'll probably get a kick out of this. Although it is not a fantasy film in the strictest genre. Anyway, I'm going to give this one a 7 out of 10. I enjoyed it. Let me know what you think. Leave me a comment. I look forward to seeing you next time. Bye for now.